back to Man Talk Monday. We are on week 2 of our 4-week series talking about the core values we have here at The Fight: death before death, reality over fantasy, kingdom above empire, and love at all cost. We talked last week about death before death. We talked about letting the ego die, and that if we die before we die, we never have to die. And the idea is not just the physical reality of that, but the idea that if we let go and we learn to live in this with this word sanctification, that we continually die to self, then when circumstances, relationships, when situations show up that we did not predict, we couldn't have thought it would go that way, and expectations are completely destroyed. We are not destroyed in that process because we've practiced death before death. We know that it's a part of the work of sanctification. We've accepted the reality that our expectations are not going to be met, not so that we don't have any, but we accept the reality that we are going to experience disappointment, but disappointment does not have to destroy us. And that ego, when we see it die, is seeds in the ground for who we were always meant to become. The fruit of putting that ego in the ground is all the fruit of connection, relationship, lifestyle, courage, confidence, conviction that we can begin to live in that we never thought was possible. But this week, once we dismantle, once we get out of the ego death phase, we are now into dismantling our fantasy life everywhere that it's hiding. I say it this way, that the enemy of transformation is fantasy. That if we want to see true transformation happen in our lives, we have to let go of fantasy. When a man rejects fantasy and accepts truth, he takes his first step towards maturity. Now, if we're going to walk fully towards maturity and we're going to reject fantasy, then not only do we need to be honest, we have honesty. Okay, we want to be honest about what's happening in our lives. That's the ego death portion. We have to start to take responsibility. And that is really, really difficult. Honesty destroys ego. Responsibility destroys fantasy. And when we start to take responsibility for our lives and start to say, oh, I have to accept that I built a life that is not congruent with who I know to be and who I want to become, the relationships I want to have, the marriage that I want to have. We see this in Iron John, right? So in Iron John, like some of you know the story, Iron John, he gets found at the bottom of this pit. He's a wild man, lives out in the forest. He's put in a cage in the center of the kingdom. He's put in a cage in the center of the castle. And this little boy playing with his golden ball, boing, 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 it bounces sideways and then bounces right into the cage of Iron John. And now Iron John's got this little boy's golden ball. And the little boy comes up and he says, give me my golden ball. And Iron John says, I'll give you the golden ball back when you get me the key to get out of this cage. Well, the little boy runs away, comes back a second time, and he says, hey, can I have my ball? And Iron John says the same thing. I'll give you the ball when, you give me the key to get out of this cage. Well, the boy comes a third time. He shows up a third time, and we don't know in myth how long that is. Maybe he was a little boy all 3 times in the myth, but for us mythologically, that could be, that could be our childhood, then into adolescence, and now we're into young adulthood, and we're having to deal with the reality and the ramifications that we've lost our golden ball. We don't know what happened to our childhood. We don't know what happened to our identity or the version of ourselves that is most true. And he says the same thing, can I have my ball? Iron John says the same thing the third time, you can have your ball back when you get me the key to get out of this cage. And the boy finally accepts responsibility. I don't know where it is. So we've gone through the ego death. Hey, this is the false version of myself. But now I have to recognize that I've built a fantasy life in the midst of this little world. But the thing I really want, I don't possess. And I have to admit, I don't know. I don't know where it is. And Iron John gives him reality, which I love this. He says, it's under your mother's pillow. The place she dreams about you, the place she dreams up of what you'll become, the place where she's intimate with your father. It's under that pillow, and you've got to go steal it because she'll never give it to you. And she'll never just give it to you. Now, we can go deep into that. There's some mother wound stuff in there, and your mom holds some of the keys to, who you were always meant to be, and she has a version of you that you're probably still living under in some ways. We're not going to get into all that. But here's the part I want to get. He goes under, steals the key, and he walks down, and he unlocks the cage. In the midst of unlocking the cage, he nicks his thumb, and he starts to bleed. So there's some pain involved. There's some suffering involved. The cage opens, and this is what I'd like to present to you today in the context of reality over fantasy. What he releases from the cage is not just the wild man, but he releases reality in his life. He releases reality and relinquishes fantasy because he gets his ball back. This is what I thought it would be like. This is what I wanted this. This is what I've wanted my whole life. And Iron John is walking off into the wilderness, and the little boy drops the ball and goes, can't basically, all but asks him, can I go with you? If I stay here, my whole life is a wreck. My whole life is destroyed. I've killed the ego and I can see it now. But if I stay in this fantasy, I can never reach my full potential. Drops the ball. I'm out. I can't reach my full potential here. And Iron John says, well, that's a problem. What do you want to do about it? What are you going to do about that? He says, can I go with you? He says, now that sounds like a good idea. And he throws him up on his shoulders and they walk out into the wilderness together. Now, this is the beginning of the story. This is the transitionary moment where he relinquishes the fantasy of what he thought his life would be and accepts the reality, the wild reality of what he was always supposed to become. Now, we can't do that unless we're going to take responsibility for our lives. We say this a ton around the fight: own your shit, take responsibility for your life. We have to own the part we played in building the fantasies that we are currently living in. But if you're looking at porn, fantasy, if you're trying to strive for it, so, you have this idea that you're supposed to be a multimillionaire in this way because some of your friends are, that's a fantasy. Well, I got to have this version of my relationship because I saw this on Instagram. That is a fantasy. All of those things have to be relinquished so that you can walk into the brave reality that you were meant to live in. No, your marriage is not going to look like mine. It's just not. You can't have my marriage because you are not Jake and Nikki Hamilton. You don't get my marriage. You don't get the fantasy version of your marriage. You don't get the fantasy version of your job. Sometimes you're just going to have to grind it out. And yes, there's 20 other people who have it, quote unquote, better than you. But the problem is the grass isn't greener on the other side. That is just a fantasy. That is a lie that has to be ruthlessly destroyed so that I can live in the reality that I am being handed. I can only live in that reality if I'm willing to take responsibility. Take responsibility for the relationships I have, the things that I've done. And now here's the key though. Once we get the things that I've done, then we have to get to the third part, because we have to go honesty, responsibility, and now we have to get to curiosity. Because if honesty destroys ego, responsibility destroys fantasy, then curiosity kills shame. Because when we start dealing with fantasies that we've been living in, like porn or like any of these things, right? Then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, you're right, I suck. You're right. My marriage sucks. It sucks. It all sucks. I'm an awful human being. No. No, we don't do that here. We do not do that here. When we talk about reality versus fantasy, or reality over fantasy, and we talk about ruthlessly destroying fantasy, when we begin to look into the fantasies we've been living in, we've been look into the fantasies we've been living under. We don't embrace shame. We embrace curiosity. We embrace curiosity. Why was I doing that? What was I looking for? What am I looking for in that fantasy? And you can begin to do that. I know that's probably part of the work we're doing today, but I'm giving it to you a little early. But I want you to list out the fantasies you're living under. What fantasies of your fantasy versions of your life have you embraced? And then without shame, without condemnation, what were you looking for in that fantasy? What was that fantasy offering you that you believe reality isn't offering you now? Because here's what I can promise you. A version of the thing you were looking for is in your life currently. It's just a little more difficult to access. Yes, when you turn that key, you're probably going to get cut. You're probably going to bleed. We talked about it last week that you're probably going to get some of that harsh brush, but it will reveal who you were meant to be. It will help you embrace the life that you were given, not the life you wish you had. not the life somebody else is living and, oh, it would be better if, it would be better if, it would be better if, because that is simply escapism. That fantasy, that fantasy version that's filled with all these things that you should have, would have, you could have, and all of that. It's just escapism to get out of the reality that you were meant to live in. It's a distraction. I guess I have it written down. Escapism isn't always sin. It's often simply a distraction. It's busyness, it's comfort, and ultimately it's control. Yes, it's not this blatant sin. Well, Jake, I'm not living in any sin in this way, that way, or that I'm not, I'm better than that guy over there. That's still a fantasy. I'm better than that guy over there is a fantasy because you are just as frail as they are. In fact, I'm reading, Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis, and one of the things he says in the first couple chapters is he talks about, it's an ancient book. I used to carry it in my back pocket when I was like 19 years old. It's like I used to carry it around because I needed that first couple chapters, like, more than anything in that time. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity, but to love God and serve Him always. And but there's this part where it says, don't celebrate when those around you stumble, because their frailty's been revealed, lest you, in your ego, this is the Jake Hamilton version, in your ego, stare at them and blame them, and that same frailty gets revealed in you. Like, guys, it's not better over there. Guys, that version we're looking for of our lives that's over there is not real. What's real is what's right in front of you. And you have two choices: either live numb or live new. So I can use all this fantasy to numb out and blame and shame, or I can accept the truth of my life and I can begin to move forward in courage. Just go back to the poem we read today, right? Look back at the poem we read today. Like, here's the path, here's the path, here's the path, here's the path. I found a new path. I began to walk on a new path. And I would say it this way: maturity is the ever increasing taking of responsibility by a man in his life. When we're growing into maturity, it is the ever increasing taking and assuming of responsibility in my life. The more responsibility you choose to take, the more mature you are becoming, because we're moving from honesty to responsibility to curiosity. And we are killing the ego, destroying fantasy, and we are eradicating shame from our lives as we walk down that path. So here's what I want you to talk about. I want you guys to talk about this. I want you to ask these two questions. What does it mean for you to take responsibility today? Right now in your life, what does it mean for you to take responsibility? I want you to have that discussion. And then I want you to ask this question too. Where is shame still causing you to live in fantasy? Where is shame still causing you to live in fantasy? I want you to ask those two questions again. What does it mean for you to take responsibility in your life today? What does that mean? And number two, where is shame still causing you to live in fantasy? Now, you don't have to answer both of those questions, but at least get to one of them so that we can ruthlessly destroy fantasy anywhere it's hiding in our lives. This is the fight.